Let's now come and look at the book of Esther. This is one of only two books named after a lady. The other is Ruth. Also, this is just one of three books written outside the Promised Land. Daniel was, Ezekiel was, and Esther. And this is one of two books that has no mention of the name of God at all. The other is Song of Solomon. So this is a very unusual book. Also, it's a very exciting story with a lot of ironical twists and, shall we say, coincidences that take place. So it's an interesting story. Author, unknown. The time, it was about 100 years after the return from the exile, right? So they were already 100 years, many of them had already gone back to Jerusalem. But as we said, many Jews never returned. They were comfortable, they had prospered in their new land. And this is a story of a Jewish community in the Persian Empire. Okay, so there were Jews everywhere, literally scattered, as God said, to the four corners of the earth. The Persian Empire was a massive empire at that time, 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. That's massive. And there were Jews everywhere. In fact, according to my family history, my great-grandmother is probably a Jewess. She lived in Malacca. That's a really large group of people at that time lived in Malacca, Jews. They were traders. And she, according to my family history, we don't know her name. Interestingly enough, all the rest had names, but she was only given the title Jewish lady in the vernacular, right? Her name was Jewish lady, and we only know one thing about her. She sold cloth. That's my great-grandmother, probably a Jew, and she was a trader. And Malacca was a big trading place. There were Jews everywhere, wherever there was business. Okay? So it tells us of the life of Jews that were scattered. This gives us a fairly good idea of the life of Jews that were scattered. Number one, they mostly forgot the law. No priests, no Levites. They just assimilated into the culture of the place they were in. They ate food that typically Jews cannot eat. You will see Esther just eating, drinking, Mordecai eating and drinking. They married Gentiles. Esther happily married the king. I mean, there was no qualms about it. They committed the same things as others got. They got drunk, they murdered people, and it's interesting that though they were so much immersed and actually tried to be like the locals, God still remembered them. And you see in this story, though God is never mentioned at all, He still cares for them, watching over every move of Esther. Though His name is not mentioned, He is obvious behind the scenes. His finger is in everything, in every event of her life. So, as Christians, sometimes we may be scattered to some far, far place. Remember, just like Esther, in spite of all her failings, she forgot many of the laws. She didn't know, nobody taught her. God still remembered His elect people, the Jews. Right? So I hope you remember, God will remember His own, though we forget Him often. Now, Esther lived in Shushan, actually in history, Susa, S-U-S-A. Susa was the Persian capital. And she was eventually married to King Ahasuerus, who was, from the story, all he does is drink and look at women and do silly things, make poor decisions, all right? He seems to be a weak character here, right? So this is the background of the story. Now, though it's 100 years later, and actually the book we just studied was Nehemiah, okay? So it appears that this event is after Nehemiah, all right? Actually, okay, it was 30 years before Nehemiah, okay? So it's not chronological, okay? Now, let's look at the first 2 chapters. It tells us of a huge, long 180-day, like a party thrown by the Persian king. Now, how do you party for 180 days? Probably, my guess is, he had 127 provinces. So basically, he was entertaining his leaders from the different provinces. The hardest thing when you rule such a widespread empire is how do you unite them? How do you be sure these guys are still part of your team, you know? I mean, in those days, there was no like Wi-Fi Zoom calls, right? So he probably was entertaining his generals, his officials, okay, to unite them and to lift up their morale. Okay, there was all empires always under threat about splitting, about the Greek Empire later came, Alexander the Great wiped out the Persians, okay? So he probably was doing his PR and bonding job, 180 days. Then at the end of 180 days, there was the big, shall we say, the summit, the celebration, and all the leaders came together and had a big party. Of course, when they have a party in those days, pagans, what happens is they get drunk. And so when King Ahasuerus got drunk, on the last day, he called his queen out. He asked for the queen to come out, and I guess to entertain his guests. You know, when the guy's drunk, he doesn't do very wise things. Of course, Vashti is the queen. He's not going to come out and dance for these guys. These are people below her. These are the officials, the generals, and she's the queen. So she refused to come. And what happens was, Ahasuerus is in a drunken rage. He's so angry, he asked for, what shall we do with this queen? And the advisors told him, you know, if you allow this to happen, all our wives too will rebel against us, right? And you cannot allow this to happen. And so they deposed her as queen. She was no more made queen. Now for me, actually, for the king, more important than that, he lost face with his generals. I mean, how can you run an empire of 127 provinces? You can't run your wife, okay? Who will look up to you? So he probably agreed to this without, you know, any second thought. Yeah, you make me lose face before my guys. And this whole idea of this celebration was to make me look like the king, right? So she's deposed, and then of course he gets lonely. And so they advise him to have a beauty pageant / sex sampling, let's put it crudely, of the virgins, the beautiful girls in the empire. So they select all the beautiful girls, and Esther, this Jewish girl, was selected. Now, of course, Esther never revealed. Most Jews in the new community don't reveal their identity because of anti-Semitism. It's always been there. It's always been, somehow the Jews have always been persecuted. Number one, they have rather strange customs that make them unique. God gave them like food laws and so on to help them to realize they were a unique people, right? But that also made others look at them as strange. And secondly, Jewish people tend to be very independent, very strong persons. And so they knew they were going to be persecuted for their uniqueness, right? And they were successful in business, so people were envious. So they hid their identity. It's very, very common. A lot of people you don't know in America, for example, today, the names you just pump one name after another, they're actually Jews who have anglicized their names. Okay, anyway, so Esther is selected in this contest. It's 12-month contest, you prepare the girl so she knows how to dress and she smells good and she's cleaned up, so that, in case she had some disease or whatever. And after 12 months, the king tests her out, so to speak, and she won the contest, right? And so she's made queen, but she never revealed her identity to the king. He thought she was a Persian girl, right? So when she was made queen, something interesting, coincidence again, happens. Her uncle, the guy who brought her up because she was an orphan, was sitting by the palace and he heard two eunuchs plotting to kill the king. So he tells Esther, Esther tells the king, and the king investigates and finds correct. And so her Mordecai's name is recorded in the chronicles of the king, the record that this court case, Mordecai was the one that said it, blah, blah, blah. It was put in the record. The king completely forgot about Mordecai. Okay, all these are coincidences. He was at the right place, he wins the contest. I mean, after all the girls, why her, whatever, all right? When the king likes somebody, he likes somebody. That's it, all right? So anyway, that's chapter 1 and chapter 2. Chapter 3 introduces a new character called Haman. Haman, interestingly enough, was promoted to be the prime minister, but he was not a Persian. He was an Agagite. Agagite. Now you say, what in the world is that? If you go back to 1 Samuel chapter 15 and verse 33, I'll give you a clue who he was. He was one of the races, original races of Canaan. And Samuel, all right, had told Saul, you have to destroy the Canaanites, including the Agagites. But Saul didn't do the job. So Samuel was so angry with Saul, he hacked, literally killed the king of Agag. That's in 1 Samuel 15:33. So just to give you the background, there was always this enmity between Agagites and Hebrews. So that is the underlying part. Now, Haman became prime minister and he expected everybody to bow to him. He was a kind of an egomaniac. But Mordecai refused to bow. That's very typical of Jewish. It's not that it's wrong to bow to a living man. I mean, you don't bow to idols. Never say you can't bow to a king or a prime minister. But typical of Jews, he was kind of independent, refused to bow, Mordecai. So Haman hated this guy who didn't give him face. Furthermore, he sensed and he knew this guy is a Jew, right? So what he does is, he went to the king, he's a prime minister, he went to the king and said, King, this race of people are very problematic. I will give you 10,000 talents of silver for the king's treasury, and let's kill all the Jews. They're problems to me. I'm a prime minister, I have problems. This guy wouldn't bow to me, and they're also independent, you can't rule them. Now, when you see 10,000 talents, you don't realize that is like, I checked it up, it's like $4.5 billion, right? Billion, okay, that's a lot of money. He was a super rich guy, and he bribed the king. Of course, the king said, why not, man? You want to add 4.5 billion to my royal treasury, you'll kill these Jews. So they, in their drinking time, his buddy, the two of them drinking, they roll dice to see what's the day to kill the Jews. And the dice fell on the 13th day of the 12th month of the Persian calendar. 13th day. That's why the number 13 is bad luck. All right? It came from this story, in case you didn't know why number 13 is bad luck. It is the day the Jews were supposed to be killed throughout the 127 provinces. So when the decree went out that all Jews would be killed on the 13th day of the 12th month, Mordecai started to rend his clothes, and Esther said, "What's up?" And she found out that Haman had bribed the king to put a decree to kill all the Jews. And so Mordecai tells Esther, "Look here, you are probably put in this position for a purpose, to save your people. No name of God mentioned." And then she thinks about it, and she agrees. And she said, "I perish. If I perish, I perish." Because when the king finds out she's a Jew, he might feel, "What? I married a Jewess? You never told me that," right? And furthermore, now there's a decree to kill her. So she now has to make a decision. She has to go to the king and do something. But in the Persian custom, nobody can approach the king unless the king calls you. And she was not called. And if you go without being called, you lose your life. But anyway, she took the risk. She went there, she stood at the door, and the king called her in. And the king said, "What can I do for you?" She said, "Can I have a party? Invite you and Haman?" And the king said, "Why not? Let's have a party. He's a party animal, right?" So they came for the party and wonder what the agenda is. And all she said is, "Let's have another bigger party tomorrow." And so Haman is like, "Whoa, the queen invited me twice." So he felt very proud. But on the way out, he saw Mordecai refuse to bow to him. And he said, "This, I cannot take it. I'm so high up there, and this fellow refuses to bow to me." So he went home. He said to his family, "I'm a big guy, and this guy won't bow." The family said, "Just build a big stake, and impale Haman on that stake." So they built a stake, one big stick sticking out with a sharp point at the end, and that stake was like 8 stories high. Whoa, that's a long pole, okay? A big piece of timber. And so the next day he comes for the party, expecting, wow, this is really going to be something big. But that night, before the party, the king had a bout of insomnia. Coincidence again. Doesn't say God's name. And in insomnia, what's the best way to cure insomnia? Read something boring. So he asked for the records of the kingdom. So the records are brought, there's scroll upon scroll upon scroll. I don't know why they brought a particular scroll. And he reads it, and he finds Mordecai's name in there, who saved his life. He forgot about it. And he asked, "Has this guy been rewarded?" No. So he figured out he had to reward this guy who saved his life. Coincidence again. So next morning, Haman comes to the king, thinking, "Whoa, I'm this big guy now." And then the king says to him, "What would you do, Haman? Advise me. What will you do to a guy who I want to honor? Is the right way to honor this guy really well?" Haman said, he thought it was himself, you see. He thought the king's going to honor him. He said, "Simple, king. Give him your robes, give him your crown, let him ride the horse, and make a noble, bring him through the streets of the capital and say, 'This is the honored man.'" He said, "Great. All right, get ready to bring Mordecai." Whoa, he got a shock. All right? And he thought, this is it, man. He had to do it. So he brings Mordecai around and has to declare, "This is the man the king honors. This is the guy he just built a stake for yesterday, to impale him. And now he's going to do the opposite, right?" So what happens is, he's already panicking when he had to bring this, and he went home, I guess, to change for the big dinner that night. And he went home, and he was like kind of depressed. And then the king's agents came and said, "Hey, don't be late, Haman. King's waiting. Party time." So he rushes to the party. And then at the party, Esther identifies herself for the first time. Tells the king, "I am a Jewess. And this man, Haman, wants to kill me and Mordecai, the Jew." King said, "What? You want to kill my wife and you want to kill the guy I just honored this morning. Coincidence again, right? And so in his drunken rage, he commits Haman to death. So Haman now is brought and put on his own stake he had built for Mordecai. He is impaled on that stake. Whoa, okay? All these stories, how does this happen? Okay? Now, what happens now is, the decree had already been gone out. The 13th day of the 12th month, all Jews can be killed. Kill them. Free day to kill Jews. And people would love to do that. The Jews own the businesses. If I kill the Jew, I don't have to pay my debts. They were the big business guys, right? So there was a free decree on the 13th day of the 12th month to kill. But Persian culture cannot revoke a decree. A decree goes out with the king's signature, his stamp, you cannot revoke. So what did they do? Now Mordecai is the prime minister. He's the honored guy. So they made a counter decree that the Jews could defend themselves on the 13th. And they were allowed to kill those who would kill them. Wow, so it's a counter decree. Of course, now everybody's a bit afraid of the Jews because Mordecai is a Jew and he's the prime minister. He's the big guy there. So many switch sides. Many who planned to kill the Jews now on the side of the Jews and identified all those who had been planning to kill the Jews. So instead of Jews being killed, there was a reverse. The Jews and those who now allied with them killed the people who wanted to kill the Jews. 14th day of the 12th month, 15th day of the 12th month, they killed all those who were planning to kill the Jews. Interesting story, all right? Now, it's very common, that many times in history, the Jewish race there was attempts to exterminate the Jewish race, right? We have like Pharaoh trying to kill all the guys, right? If you kill all the guys, then there's no more production of babies, okay? The babies would not be Jews anymore. They would be another race. There was people like Herod trying to kill all the babies. There was Hitler, right? So there's always this satanic plot to remove the Jews. So because of Esther and all these coincidental events, the Jews were prevented from being extinct. You mustn't forget, the empire stretched from India to Ethiopia, basically where all the Jews had migrated to, including the Promised Land. It's part of this empire of the Persians. In other words, if this event had not taken place and Haman had his way, there would be no Jews left, including no Jesus, right? Because Jesus' family was within the Persian, Jesus' descendants or ancestors were within this territory of the Persian king. So this prevented the loss, okay? So you see how God has planned all these interesting things, right, to protect her. Okay, so this is the story. Now, some people feel this book is so Jewish. Okay, before I go into that, so the 14th and 15th day of the 12th month, the Persian month, is still celebrated by the Jews. It was decreed by Mordecai that this day must always be set. Up to today, the Jews celebrate it. It's called Purim. Pur is the name of the dice they threw to choose the day, right? So the 13th became a bad luck day, but the dice became Festival of Purim, celebrated the 14th and 15th day of that calendar today. in their Jewish communities, this is their big fun celebration. They read the story of Esther, and every time the name of Haman is mentioned, they scream, they stand their feet, they yell, and they make noise, at this villain in the story. That's the way it is. It's a party now. Most Jewish celebrations are very sacred, very quiet. There's a lot of, but Purim is like a party time, all right? Celebration. Our how do you call it? We were freed up from being annihilated. Okay, so God had made all these coincidences for them. All right. So some people feel this book there's no God. It's all about Jews killing people. Even Martin Luther, people like that said this book shouldn't be in the Bible. He was kind of angry. He's German, doesn't like the Jews. But what happened was, we must never be anti-Jew. We must never. Even you don't like the Jews and they make all the money in the world, you must never be anti-Jew, right? Because our truth has come through the Jews, right? The entire Bible is written by Jews, except for Luke, right? He was the only Gentile writer. If not for the Jews, we don't know God. Okay? So, when you hear Christians speaking things against the Jews, just be careful. Alright, so what have we learned in this lesson? Kind of funny story. No mention of God. But no mention of God doesn't mean no presence of God. This is a book showing how God typically works behind the scenes. Many people never see the hand of God because they only can see miracles done in the church when some faith healer comes or some rally in some stadium. That's the only time they see God. They need to see a miracle to see God. That's why they hardly see God. They're looking for the events. God doesn't work in that. God works in the normal things of life where somehow things seems to work out in favor. How Mordecai hears the eunuch's plot. How the king has insomnia and gets a particular scroll on the particular day. I mean, why that particular line? I mean, there's like 1,000 scrolls there, right? Boring stuff. He saw the name, right? Everything just seems to fit in. And I look at my life and I can say, that's exactly the story of my life. Somehow God works things out. Even this beautiful book, I mean, it's something, COVID comes in, and then I can't go out, and then I just started my recording. Now I learned how to do a lot of recordings, and then all of a sudden I say, wow, everything put in place. God raised up a technical guy to help me set up the studio. God raised up a technical guy to help me edit all the videos. God raised up a team to do the transcripts, to do the subtitling. Wow! From where? I don't know. They're all raised up. Okay? It's like coincidence, COVID, this. No. It's all the hand, the finger of God in our lives. And every day we should look back and say, thank you, God, for this. Why at this time? Wow, never saw it. All right? This is quiet time where we begin to see the hand of God. But there are 90% of Christians are looking for some bang, some miracle, and otherwise there's no God. They'll tell you, come to this place and see this man, the man of God. I see the God of man all the time. All right? So I hope you understand this is how God works. Even however far you are, I don't think Esther and Mordecai thought a lot about God. They're like God's out of their mind, but out of their breath. But they were never out of God's mind. They were God's people. You see how God works in the mess of life. It looks like so nothing to do in the king's palace and harems and drunkenness. And God's there, faithfully working through imperfect people. His perfect plan of redemption to preserve the Jewish seed that will bring the Christ into this world. All right? So I hope you understand that though God is not here, God is here. Though God is not in your life like those miracles, God is with you. That's the wonderful part about this. Then you see how God raises the Jews. Unique, huh? Moses became the number 2 man in the Egyptian empire, which was like the massive one. Daniel, Babylonian empire. Mordecai, Persian empire. My goodness, all these Jews, God raised them up. Singapore's first chief minister, interestingly enough, was a Jew. 100% Jew. He was from Baghdad. Baghdadi Jew became the first chief minister of independent Singapore. Can you imagine that? All right? How God just works things out for his elect. And people think God's forgotten the Jews? No. God chooses, God elects, and God is faithful even though they were not faithful to him. Some people say if you know Hebrew, though you don't see the name of God in this, I don't know Hebrew, so I can't tell you. They say you can look at the acrostic, you can see in the Hebrew language, the invisible hand of God is in it through acrostics. Acrostics is like the letter A, letter B, letter C through the verse, and that is found only in Hebrew, and only in certain parts of the Bible God puts his thumbprint there because he doesn't put his name there. I don't know that. I'm not a, but it's enough for me to see the hand of wonderful God, the beautiful God. And this is a beautiful book about him. I hope you enjoyed this study. It's not a romance of a drunken king and a queen. It's a romance of my God and me. My God